Are you a paranoid man? This is the very beginning here. I'm going to cut everything before, and then the first question will be, are you a paranoid man? So, spotlight.
Yeah. Oh, very. And this goes back to, this would be a good plug for the last sort of philosophical conversation we had, that, the way that I grew up, it's, you get two things as reward and punishment, and they're both very extreme. So always looking for the other shoe to drop, just the next.
No, but that was a more existential reward punishment situation, right? The one you're talking about before in our previous conversation, you're talking about hellfire, correct?
Yeah. Well, and then that.
But it's the same mentality. I mean, if it's existential or immediate or jury duty or whatever, it's the same mentality, right?
Yeah, it's sort of the baseline for when a result is going to happen to you, it's going to happen in one of two ways. And when you're brought up to think that in no other way, then you kind of carry that through the rest of your life. So sort of now I'm still trying to undo that programming.
Well, but is there any merit to having that programming? Because I definitely have it less than you, and there are people who have it at a significantly lesser degree, to a significantly lesser degree than me. But I would say I'm not as far that way as you, because I didn't grow up on brimstone.
Yeah,
I didn't get brimstone in my 9-grain malto meal when I was a kid.
On the corner of Brimstone.
Oh,
Boulevard,
I mean, I was raised in a cult, but we did other kinds of weird stuff,
Like what?
Well, I had to. I was homeschooled, so being homeschooled, I had to read books, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Read a lot of books.
Bless you for
read a lot of books about Crispus Attucks and other such people. I had a set of books when I was a kid. It was just American figures, but not all of them were famous people. So not super famous, not only people like Abraham Lincoln, but more obscure historical figures. But they were all painted in the same light. And the stories were pretty honest. They were just biographies, but biographies written for, I guess, kids. I don't know. And I didn't know the difference between any of them. So I grew up thinking, Frederick Douglass and George Washington were on equal footing. Like, what's the difference? They're both the greatest. Then I realized, well, yeah, Frederick Douglass is an important figure, but it's maybe not quite the same level, But I didn't really register that until much later in life. So, I might say Crispus Attucks this and Crispus Attucks that, and people will say, "Who's that?" And I say, "What do you mean, who's that? He's like the same as George Washington."
God, I forgot who was Crispus Attucks.
I think he's just the guy who started the Boston Massacre. I think he was the first person killed in the Boston Massacre. I think the only his legacy is throwing a piece of, granite at some British soldier, some redcoat, and then him turning around and shooting him in the head. And obviously he has a life before that. But I didn't register those things until much later in life. In fact, I probably still haven't done that.
Yeah. Louis Armstrong, Neil Armstrong.
Yeah, they're all great. Equal footing. Yeah. Kathy Bates, Harriet Tubman, same person.
Yes. Yeah.
No, Kathy Bates wasn't in those books, but she should be.
For that performance in Misery.
Yeah,
absolutely.
She did a good job. We can say that for sure. But really, I don't know if it's her or if it's the writing, because Stephen King wrote the original book, correct?
Yeah.
He's got a depth of not even darkness. He just has a depth of understanding how the underlying psyche of fictional people that transcends, I think, a lot of other writers, even the greats. He has a way of building a mundane character into this very complex psyche that becomes extremely interesting. I read the Dark Tower series in high school, and it's very impressive. Yeah,
that's all of Stephen King's work that I've read is the Dark Tower stuff.
Did you like the Dark Tower series?
Oh yeah. I read it straight through, and I think
I read it straight through in high school. The
Dark Tower had just come out. Yeah, that was. I think I was in. I may have been in high school too, or college, just first or second year of college.
Yeah. I'm sure this is really interesting content for anybody watching this.
Well, speaking of dark, complex characters, how about that Rust Cole?
That was a pretty half-assed segue. What if you just tilted your monitor up a little bit so that your head was slightly lower, so that we were on the same plane? Is that doable, or more so? That's pretty good. Yeah, that's perfect. That's
good?
Great. Yeah, this is going to be great. That's perfect. We're even taking up because Mushroom was watching the playback yesterday, and she said, "Why is your face so close to the screen? It's really annoying. I hate it. Don't show me any more of this." And so then I realized I need to be a little bit farther back. But then now that sort of makes me a little lower. I didn't notice it before. Didn't think about it.
Yeah. I mean,
last episode was a huge hit. We have 13 views.
Wow.
It's a smash hit. Yeah. That's if there was one. So just for context, so in the previous one we talked about, we mostly focused on, I think, the characters of Rust and Marty, mostly, and that was probably my doing. Because we
talked about the symbolism.
We did a little bit, but we didn't really talk about that. Didn't talk about it that much. We didn't spend as much time on it. I watched the whole thing. I don't know if you did, and I came away with the impression of what a conversation hog that guy on the left is, especially. Okay. And why is he so fixated on one single thing? And it seemed like I was very focused on, maybe overly so, focused on the dynamic between Rust and Marty, because that's what really grabs my attention. I might inadvertently do it again, but
it's important. It's definitely important.
It's still the most interesting thing about the show, but I think for this one, I'd like to tie it into the masculinity, femininity conversation, because I think there wasn't much to talk about in the last episode. This one, there definitely is a lot of fodder for discussion there.
Yeah.
It's pronounced.
Yeah.
And I do want to just before I want to ask you something, but before we do that, I want to say, don't stress too much about spoilers. Like if you feel like there's something that's worth commenting on, but you would refrain because you're worried I'm going to find out something later, it's all right. It's okay. Yeah. Okay. For the sake of the flow of the conversation, if you feel there's a relevant point or a theme or something that might spoil something or other, it's fine. I'm a big boy.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're a big what?
I'm a big boy.
Okay.
Yeah. And this time I'm actually drinking what you're drinking.
Cool.
Yeah.
Coke Zero? No, yeah. Coke Zero?
Cow urine. What about you?
Yeah.
Yeah. So pretty clearly there's a dynamic between Marty and women. Mm-hmm. And there's definitely something going on, and I think Marty is the vehicle for our exploration of the some of the issues between the traditional male view of women in society, and I think he's sort of the puppet for that particular message. Would you agree with that? He seems to be in this episode, at least.
Yeah.
In three ways. One, he has a mistress who is only there to satisfy his sexual urges, and he doesn't seem to want anything else with her. Two, he has a wife who he gets upset with if she disrupts the peace of his family, even when she should disrupt the peace of her family because he's a drunk ass. And three, he gets upset about prostitutes being prostitutes when in fact it's the prostitutes who should be upset about being prostitutes, or not if they don't want to be, right?
Yeah.
That seems to be the comment. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah. I think so. When they go to did they call it the Bunny Ranch? I know there's a Bunny Ranch in Arizona.
I think that's just a general term. I don't think that's the specific. Okay. Yeah, I think he's using a colloquialism there. I don't think that's a specific term. I think that's a kind of thing. That's how I took it anyway. Bunny Ranch being a sort of plantation of prostitutes.
Sure.
Or whatever you call it. Like in this case, a little campground with campers.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, so a couple of things with that scene. I wonder
which one?
The scene where they go to the Bunny Ranch, where he and Cole are their investigation leads them to where
we've now switched to last names, just as a signal there. We're now switching to Cole and what's the last name of the other one?
I can't remember Marty's last name. Cole, Rust and Marty. I can do Rust and Marty.
Okay, let's do Cole and McFly.
Okay. So Rust and Marty go to the Bunny Ranch, and I wonder if there's supposed to be some type of connection to sort of Sirens. Often
interesting.
If maybe prostitutes. Is it? Yeah, the Sirens luring the sailors. Yeah. Mm. Right. Luring the sailors into the rocks. So, they're not really getting lured into rocks in this situation, but gross. It's just, it seems like it's a trope that's used in several movies to say, okay, this is the tone we're trying to evoke here, that there's something to be learned, but it's dangerous. You have to go through some sort of trial to access the actual knowledge to get past sort of the danger of the situation. I don't know if
does the siren concept, does it necessitate women being involved? Because I would say the trope of the sirens would be resisting temptation normally, wouldn't it? There's no resisting temptation in that scene. Neither of them are tempted by what's going on there.
Sure, yeah. And I mean, it could be, but the idea with honeypot or prostitutes just being the idea of temptation or sort of embodying the idea of temptation. And I think twice in this episode, you've got Marty and Rust, they go to the Bunny Ranch, and then in the other scene, Rust is alone speaking with prostitutes. So it's just sort of, I think, evoking that idea of temptation, and it's specifically temptation from the female power, from a feminine power. And so there's that. And then when they go in to talk to, I think, the woman who leases the land, or who sort of is the madam of the trailer park, she has that conversation with Marty, in which she says that the problem with men like Marty is they only get upset with female sexuality when men don't own it.
Right.
So a huge indicator of a huge theme throughout this entire series of men's attempt to dominate female sexuality, or understand it or control it in some way, rather than letting it exist as it is, as, hey, here's the compliment. And not to say that that's the prostitutes are the only embodiment of female sexuality.
Well, that's the interesting thing, though, is because 70% of the women basically depicted in this show are either gross, intentionally gross, or trashy girls, and or prostitutes. I feel like that's the prevalent tone here. That's what's being shown. I don't, I haven't quite got my head around why exactly. There are a few that would contradict that, like Marty's wife, I guess. She seems very responsible and a strong person, but he sees that as obstinance and being a ball buster.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and maybe that's in the scene where they go to the Bunny Ranch. You have the idea of sort of unbridled female sexuality, because there's no male in that entire scene to cast any type of idea of control over what women do with their bodies there. And then if you then switch to the home life, Marty's home life, or even when he goes to visit his in-laws, you've got the male-female sort of traditional idea of control over women,
right,
and control over how a woman should act, specifically how they should act around men. So he
sees his wife as a tool of comfort for his psyche. That's it.
Yeah.
Which she doesn't even fulfill the sexual component of that anymore. Now it's just make sure that things are peaceful here because I need to unwind. And I don't know how genuine he's being, because I couldn't help but thinking, I wonder if he's, overdoing it a little bit to avoid suspicion of his affair, or I'm not sure, or maybe he's being completely genuine, in which case he's really less of a good person than I thought he might have been in the first.
Yeah. I think, I don't know. It comes. What do you think about this? His method or his lifestyle just seems to embody that traditional, what has been maybe portrayed in movies and sort of projected into society over the past, I don't know, since the 40s, 50s, 60s. It's sort of the
1950s, definitely.
Yeah, the Mad Men sort of idea of male-female domestic roles. And then just set up against that, you've got this more wild, uncivilized example of female power, I think, female dynamic with the prostitutes, the Bunny Ranch. And, to echo that, specifically the idea of male domination or control of the female power. And I keep saying female power because reading all this anthropology stuff, that's a specific topic, the female power versus the male power, and how they've been embodied in gods and goddesses throughout history. And so talking about that male god versus female god in domination, remember the photo that Rust looks at in the trailer when they're talking to the mother of Dora Lange, and it's got the girl standing amidst that pantheon of gods, essentially, because those men are masked as though they are gods, and it's seen. And
they're Klansmen, right? They're.
I don't think it's. I don't think it's supposed to be specifically like the Klan.
I wasn't sure what was going on there. Why did he keep looking at the photo, and why did, unless it's a hint that she's going to be then later in life, because she was sort of indoctrinated early with that mindset and attracted to things like whatever it was that ended in her death.
Yeah.
Well, does that go anywhere, or is that just the hint that tells us that she's the type of person who's going to be sort of attracted to that sort of thing because she grew up in that sort of pantheon? You can call it that, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe it's the idea of grooming, of being groomed for that sort of the destiny to then become the sacrifice.
Interesting.
Which Dora Lange did eventually become. She's the DB, the dead body we find at the beginning of the show. And so that image of masked people is you find it in Primitive, or I can't remember what's the accepted term for it is now, but Primitive is what I've been reading these books from the 40s to the 70s. And
who's his?
Huh? What?
You said I've been reading his books from the 40s to the 70s.
Oh no, these books like Eliade and all these anthropologists, and they they'll say primitive. But anyway,
I think people know. I think people know what people mean when they say primitive.
Yeah.
Sort of pagan era stuff.
Specifically, I think what those guys are trying to evoke with primitive is the idea that it's before civilization, so before city-states, before hierarchical structures of towns and things
Yeah.
like that, before writing, before any type
But I mean,
of...
yeah, but the belief systems at that time would have been what we might identify as sort of tribal pagan religions, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, and in all of those different, well, in many of those different societies, you had people wearing masks at different ceremonies to sort of portray the gods, an embodiment of the gods that were taking part in the ceremonies. And so when we see that image of the girl standing amidst those male deities, it's, think of it in the sense of those male deities, that male power trying to dominate the female power. And that's a theme. It might be the most important theme that runs throughout this entire series.
It's becoming more clear now, definitely. It wasn't really there in the first episode, but it's definitely becoming that, and that's pretty obvious. If that picture had been something they looked at once, then I wouldn't have really focused on it. But then I think in that scene, he looked at it 3 different times, I think. And then it becomes obvious that has to be something of significance. But what plot-wise could that be? Really, it's over. It's something that happened a long time ago. The people in the masks, does that have anything to do with what's going on now? Maybe, could be. But if it's only thematic, and if it's meant to just reinforce the concept of someone being sort of... I guess she's... maybe her mentality indoctrinated to this sort of way of thinking that she belongs to the male pantheon, or whatever you want to call it, and that's her place in the world. And so later in life, when she's having hard times and she's living at a ranch with prostitution, she's thinking back to her childhood and thinking, where did I feel that I belonged? Where did I feel that I actually mattered? Well, I felt that I mattered when I was surrounded by, maybe, yeah, okay, it's unbalanced, and it's, who knows what that was all about. But you know how nostalgia works. Anything from your childhood that wasn't abusive is nostalgic, even if it's the shittiest toy you owned. When you think back on that, it becomes the most important thing in that particular memory. So my sense would be then, and I would preface this by saying I've seen 2 episodes so far. I have not seen episode 3, so I don't know any of this stuff. It's just sort of forward projecting. Hopefully totally wrong. I don't know. But she's going through this terrible place in her life, and her friend reinforces that and says that she was going through some shit and her eyes looked vacant. And then maybe dawns on her when she sees this poster of this sort of, whatever it is, a church. I don't know what's going on with that church.
It's like a tent revival.
Yeah, okay. So whatever that is, suddenly sort of awakens her, and she feels that it's a way for her to get back to the innocence of her childhood, even if that innocence is a very sort of twisted sort of innocence. To her, it's innocence. To her, that's much better. That place is much better than where she currently is, which is basically she's a prostitute. Yeah,
and so it's funny that this all is coming up right now, because I've been reading this book I just finished a book by Mircea Eliade called Patterns in Comparative Religion, and I started another one called The Myth of the Eternal Return. And one of the things he talks about is exactly what you just said, which is that idea of nostalgia, or when we're looking for almost an earthly paradise, or that means trying to when we remember a time when things were good, when things were, it seemed like
Make
they
America
were
great again.
Sure. Yeah.
Let's go down that road right now.
Yeah. So when you're remembering a time or a space when things were effective, a time when things mattered and they were real. Well, what did it, in these primitive tribes, when they were, Eliade says, in these primitive tribes, when people think about things, the only things that were real were the things that were begun by the gods during the great time, or in illo tempore, I think is the term he uses, and that means at the time of creation, the time of the gods, the time when there was when things were set in motion, or
right.
things were set into distinction, a pattern was started. And so think about when you go ahead. What?
No.
Oh,
say your words, sir.
When we, so like in childhood, when we think of, oh, this was a good time when things were this way. And so we have that nostalgia. Things seemed real. Things seemed powerful. I wish I could have that back. So when you have these, and in religious ceremonies, whether it be the like communion in a Christian church, or some other ceremony. Yeah. Communion. Yeah.
Great crackers.
Yeah.
Ooh, are those Triscuits?
We're changing things up a little bit with the Triscuits. We're trying some new stuff.
It's a whole grain body of Christ.
Christ on a cracker. And so when you think about those are supposed to recall or relive those powerful moments, to remind us of the powerful moments when things were good, when things were sacred, when things were real, when things were effective. So let's take that sort of anthropological idea and put it onto this show. Are they trying to, is it possible to maybe glean what these guys are trying to, or what the writer is trying to say by applying that idea to this sort of tribal looking photograph? Is it's, I don't know, that it's, or maybe when trying to look at Dora Lange's habits, she's gone away from what is nostalgic. And then maybe she thinks of, oh, the nostalgia I had was to be in the situation where I was dominated by men, which she was groomed to be. And she was groomed essentially to have this nostalgia for being dominated.
Right.
And I wonder if that's sort of what Nick Pizzolatto is maybe trying to show with this show, is this, maybe that's one of the commentaries he's making. Is
that's the only thing that, well, does that picture come back later? Is that an important picture?
Yeah, it's very important. Yeah.
All right. Never mind then. I guess the whole thing,
never mind.
Forget it. If they showed that picture 3 times and that picture was irrelevant to anything else in the plot, then you'd have to say, yes, absolutely, without a doubt. Otherwise, they wouldn't show it 3 times. Anytime a director shows something 3 times in a scene, it's important, which is why I don't know what's going on with her headaches. Something's got to be going on. Otherwise, she wouldn't have said that. Probably. But so maybe, yes, maybe it has 2 meanings now. It's thematic and also relevant later, if it comes back in the story.
Yeah, and very relevant, and I'm just formulating this now,
episode
so it could be wrong. Yeah, we'll see.
Episode 9.
I wish there was. Oh man, I wish. I think the third season. I'm looking forward to the third season because I think they're going to get back to the roots of. Get back to the roots of. They kind of lost the plot in the second season. That's another discussion. Maybe after we watch episode 8, we could talk about season 2.
When you say roots, are you saying that in the third season there's someone who lives under the tree in the roots?
Yeah.
They are using an easy bake oven to make Triscuit crackers.
Yeah, that's
looking forward to that.
It's good comedy.
It wasn't comedy.
Anyway, I think I've been trying to figure out, okay, well, what's the deal with this male-female dynamic in the series? And maybe that's it. It's sort of a mystical way to talk about sort of how we experience male-female domination, submission now. So
yeah,
does that make sense?
Yeah. So I think kind of what you're saying is maybe that particular commentary is a caricature of what exists right now, because, well, if you're a girl growing up now in Western society, let's say, or actually, you know what? let's just say, well, there's a gnat flying. Can you see the gnat flying around?
It's
this damn little gnat.
Our biggest fan.
Fuck off, little gnat. It's our biggest fan. He watched the first episode 13 times. Yeah. So no, I think if that's the idea and that's the theme, then and that's not just a plot point and foreshadowing, then that sort of indoctrination would be a sort of caricature of what it's like to grow up as a girl in modern society, where maybe it's not as extreme, but you're growing up with the understanding that you have a place, and I guess less so now that you have to be a homemaker, but it's sort of like mirrored by then the relationship between Marty and his wife, and she's obviously frustrated, but obviously she knows what is expected of her, and he sort of enforces that, and when she goes out of bounds, then his anger comes out. And I find him, I think he is now more so than Rust, I think he's a great vehicle for the commentary on the sort of, not only the dynamics between men and women and the masculine sort of role in society, but also as we talked about in the last one, what is the sort of the side effects of the normal Joe, that when you buy into, even subconsciously, this idea that you live this particular life and you sort of float downriver on driftwood, then, or you follow the specific steps that you're supposed to follow, other things that are maybe bubbling under the surface have to pop out, and those things might be, those things create the person that he is, not underneath of his sort of normal Joe visage, but his whole being is this person who to everyone else looks like a model cop, but in order to sustain that facade, he has to indulge in having a mistress. He has to drink a lot in order to sustain himself. He has to drink. He demands that his wife not be a real person. She's not even a person to him. She's, at least it seems like, she is the non-sexual component of his break time. You know what I mean? He needs a break time, and he has two pieces now. Maybe she was both of them before, but now he has two parts, and that sustains him. And he has this sort of illusion that because of his work, he needs it and he deserves it. And this feeling that he deserves it, he doesn't even question that it's there. Even 17 years later, he still doesn't question it. A man needs his release, or whatever he says. A man needs to decompress. He doesn't even question that he should do that. And that may be sort of a commentary on how, I think it's a commentary, and I don't want to beat this horse to death because I think I did that in the last one, but it's almost a necessity if you're going to become a person like him, that there are these sort of things that pop out, and these vices that have to be there under the surface to support or buttress the facade. Whereas Rust doesn't need those things. When he's with the prostitute, he's not tempted. Yeah, he needs his quaaludes, but I don't know exactly why he's not interested. Maybe because she's very bruised and kind of gross. But he seems to me now to be, Rust seems to me to be, in a way, both above the world, like a sort of a hot air balloon floating above it, tethered to a single string, and at the same time, because of that, more in it. So he can, without being tempted, he can wander through a brothel and find out information and go with a girl and get her bag and get a diary, and Marty has to be distracted by becoming irate that maybe this girl is selling herself, whereas Rust is able to really just suddenly sink into the situation, absorb it all, not judge it, and then he gets a lot out of that. He gets the information that he needs.
Yeah. It's an example there of a character who can coexist and dance with the feminine aspect, that being Rust.
He's got a there's something feminine about his demeanor. I don't know what it is exactly. I don't know.
And him as a contrast to Marty's character, who can't, coexist on an equal plane without sort of psychological trauma with females. And I want to.
You mean creating psychological trauma for females?
Right.
Yeah. He's not. He's not experiencing trauma. He's getting all the perks.
Well, yeah, and you mentioned. I want to come back to that. But you mentioned first repression, the idea of repression, and Jung would talk about all these things that we repress years and years. As years and years go by, when we're young, they come back to we repress them, but they have to get out, kind of like a release valve. They have to get out, and eventually they do come out, and it's what we call our shadow, the aspect that we've repressed forever, and then we get a sense of it when our sort of ability to repress it starts to crack, when all that stuff starts to bubble up. We have to deal with it, and some people go through a psychotic breakdown, or they have a lot of psychological trauma, but then some people, they can actually deal with the shadow and integrate it into themselves,
right,
and thus become a whole, complete person. And so when there's the fantastic juxtaposition of looking at look at the relationship that Marty has with his fling, the lawyer, the paralegal, right? I forgot her name, the actress's name.
You mean you mean his mistress?
Yeah, his mistress.
I didn't know she was a paralegal. I didn't know what her job was.
Yeah, she's like a court clerk.
Oh, right, because in the first episode she came in, and then they went out together. Yeah, that's right. Now I remember. Yeah.
Yeah, and
she's
so look at
paralegal. Who can move? Who can move?
Yeah. So looking at sort of the and outside of the sanctioned sexual relationship that he has with her, and then outside of the sanctioned sexual relationships that Rust has with the prostitute. The prostitute
was
is
that a
not
sexual relationship though.
No. But I'm trying to set it up more with the idea of it's a potentially sexual dynamic between a man and a woman outside of the realm of marriage. That's what
So you mean sanctioned by it is what is done. A single man is within his rights to go and do that. That's sanctioned behavior. What do you mean by that?
So let's say a traditionally sanctified sexual behavior between a man and a woman, like where I came from Alabama, and the Southern Baptist atmosphere is only in marriage, and it's okay, and that's and almost inherent in that idea of that traditional structure is that there can be no wrong in this situation. As long as the man and woman are married, then it's all good. There can be no bad. And so let's say that sort of exists here. And then you've got Marty's dynamic with the paralegal, which is a sexual dynamic, or at least it's there outside of the realm of marriage. And then you've got, on the other side of that, you've got what could potentially be a sexual dynamic, because he and the prostitute, Rust, they do talk about sex.
Right.
And that exists outside of the realm of sanctified, traditional male-female sexual dynamics. So that's kind of what I'm trying to set up. Well, let's look at how these two guys deal with that situation here, right? Mm. And so I think that's, again, just exemplifying the difference between the two. And here, right, you can see Rust. He dances in that situation. He has, it's more of on equal footing with the woman. It's like I'm not trying to bust you. I'm just trying to get information. I have this goal I'm trying to get to. How do we work? Yeah, and Quaaludes, how do we work together? Whereas Marty is more of what can I get out of the situation, in this sense, and it's sort of this domination. Because remember, he talks about, hey, there's a killer on the loose. I don't want you going out. Like, there's no need for you to go out on dates and hang out with your girlfriends. Just stay at home. So he's trying to dominate the woman, whereas Rust is not trying to dominate. He's more of dancing with as an equal, as a partner.
That's exactly what I got out of that. Yep. Yeah, I think that's spot on. I think it's almost like Marty is a strained stick, and he's being bent, and he's at the breaking point but has not. And so all of those things sort of pop out by virtue of that. Whereas Rust is broken long ago. He can just sort of jive with whatever happens, and he doesn't have the hang-ups that pull his attention away from what should be done. And so in that way, he's showing that he's kind of comfortable with himself, maybe because he was wrecked earlier in his life because his daughter died. I think he's he's more comfortable with himself even later on. He's almost like a drunk Buddha at the end. I'm realizing in episode 2, he is. He's like a drunk Buddha.
That's the thing. That's the thing for sure.
He is, and and it is, and so that I think that freedom is obvious, and it shows that behavior is rewarded. Whereas Marty can't focus on anything else. When they go to the bunny ranch, he can't think about anything else other than, I need to give this girl $20 because I'm the man. I need to supply her the means to liberate herself. If I don't give her $20 to liberate herself, she will not be able to do that. I'm sort of from on high, and it's another symbol of his inability to perceive the world that he's actually living in, which is that the women around him are as capable as him. He sees himself as sort of this roving superior being that either needs things or once in a while will sort of deign to free someone from their bondage, basically. So I think that's how he sees things, and because of that, he gets so upset in that situation when he's talking to the mistress, the madam. Yeah, I was gonna say female pimp, but the madam. Yeah, I guess that's the right way to say it. He gets so upset that he can't do his job, which is to be an investigator, and because Rust is able to dance, as you say, because he is able to live in balance with his shadow, basically, then he's able to, without questioning it, just say, yeah, these girls do this, and then go and get the bag of what's her name and her diary. And so every time he does the genuine thing, the thing that is dancing rather than the unbalanced, whatever it is that Marty's doing, whenever he does that, he's rewarded for that. He always gets the next lead, basically. Yeah. I find that very interesting.
And in a sense, you were right. Rust, he's integrated his shadow. He's been to and seen the darkest side of himself, because he explains his sort of time in the psychiatric ward later in the show.
Sort of like we were talking about last time with the jumping into the abyss. He's done that.
Yeah, and he talks about the death of his daughter, and he names his daughter, and her name is interesting. Her name is Sophia, and Sophia means wisdom. And I would imagine that that's an intentional choice, because an intentional choice for the writers to name her Sophia, because at her death, that's sort of his initiation into knowledge of himself.
Right.
That's the starting off point of his descent into himself, to find out who he is, to eventually break down and incorporate his shadow. He becomes the shadow for a while, and when he goes into deep undercover, in narcotics and drugs, mind-altering substances and persona-altering substances, and then he comes out of it.
You're right. He reaches the lowest point and then climbs out.
Yeah, and when he comes out of it, he still has those residual side effects that remind him, yeah, you've been initiated. You have the secret knowledge. So
channel. You can now channel the universe.
Yeah, yeah, and so yeah, and so he's been initiated, and his daughter's name being Sophia, he gets the wisdom, he's initiated, and so now he can play both. He can play whatever role is needed.
Right.
If to exemplify that, when he goes up to the madam, he asks her something like, "Is this some kind of hillbilly?" What does he say? Is it
I don't remember.
Some kind of
I remember he said something that made me chuckle, but I forget exactly the line. You should
know.
And you've seen it 4 times.
Yeah, I should. Is this some kind of hillbilly bunny ranch? And he says, and then the madam says, "Well, I can't remember."
Doesn't she just shrug? I think she just shrugs.
No, she says something about, because his response, she says something to him. "You better take it up with sheriff, some so and so, before you start trying to impose laws around here." And he says, "Oh, it's something like, I got no problem with hillbillies. It's so much better." But the point of it is that he's making a joke, I think, maybe to sort of put her on edge around authority. But so he's playing the bad cop, but then later he plays good cop, so he can play whatever role is needed. And again, when he goes in and he starts beating up the 2 guys in the auto shop in order to get the information,
it's not in his character to do that, but that's what's required at the moment.
He can do whatever is needed.
Right.
Yeah.
He's got the flexibility of mind to know what's required of him, which is allowed because he doesn't have the hang-ups to prevent him from seeing through that. It's almost like at every one of those points, Marty has those sort of opaque walls around him that keep him within the bounds of his normal guyness, that prevent him from seeing the creative solution or from emotionally being able to go to a place that Rust is capable of going to. He just waits in the car when he goes in there. He should do that. He should be in there too. They should both beat him up, but he stays in the car. He's just a regular cop with a big ass dick.
Yeah. Yeah, you're learning. You're remembering well. The important things.
Only the important things.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I did want to bring up, we're talking about juxtapositions and these 2 guys being foils for each other, right? To borrow a Shakespearean term.
Yeah, foils in 2 different ways. Yeah.
2 different ways.
They're foils. They're foils to each other as characters, but they're also foils to each other as I think worldviews or ways of being in the world. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
There's a larger battle going on, sort of 2 behemoths fighting back and forth.
Yeah, Apollo Dionysius.
Yes.
Again,
there you go. That's the one. Yeah.
I don't know if I just noticed this in this watch through, but the scene where Marty
you
goes
watched it?
to,
I haven't watched it yet.
when Marty goes to see his paramour, the paralegal who's also the paramour.
Yeah.
At the end of their
what does it mean?
Yeah. At the end of their time together, he's eating her ass, right?
He begins to. Yeah. She seems okay with it. He seems to have an anal fixation.
They're very Freudian, maybe.
In the bar, he says someone put her finger in his ass. He says, "Now I can't do without it."
That's right.
And then later he's very fixated. When she turns around, he's more fixated, and then at the end he does that. So it seems to sort of suggest that that's his thing. And maybe that's just to make his character more interesting, but
maybe
he's an ass man.
Which could be an allusion to Freudian psychology and saying that he's still infantile. He's still. I think that's part of you've got the fecal obsession, then you've got the phallic obsession, then the anal obsession, and then in the Freudian psychology, I think that's sort of the progression of eventually progressing out towards a robust human being rather than just having sort of crude fixations. So maybe that's
what is the anal fixation?
I can't remember.
Well, that's disappointing.
Sorry. If anything, those 3 things are just at the front end of sort of human progression into a mature adulthood.
Right.
So, the scene where he begins to eat her ass, right after that, it cuts to Rust washing his mouth out with mouthwash.
Yeah.
I never noticed that before, but I think that's
good directing. I think that's a directorial choice.
Yeah, it's comedic relief.
Yeah, so. You're gonna need this.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Another just sort of interesting thing about this show, to sort of ping lighter ideas, is I don't, again, on this watch through, it seems like they only have 3 types of advertisers that may be paid for this show, and that's gun manufacturers, alcohol manufacturers, and tobacco. So you got Camel cigarettes, you got Lone Star beer, and then there's a Smith & Wesson coffee mug in the show. So and all of that, these are vices. And so how is that significant? Well, I think it's interesting, number one, to show the only place that to fund a show with this type of content, you have to go to these people to get money. But at the same time, the show is about vices, it's about heavy stuff. And so here we have vices playing back into it.
It's very interesting. So, So I'm fascinated by, I'm watching the cigarette butts to make sure they have continuity. And I'm wondering how many cigarettes per take does Matthew McConaughey need to smoke, or per scene does Matthew McConaughey need to smoke to actually get through one cigarette in a scene? And I know this because I made a movie in high school. And it was a buddy cop movie, and we thought it would be funny if we made all of our teachers angry by having one of the buddy cops be a smoker. And we realized, for the sake of continuity, well, cigarettes obviously go down, so if you shoot one scene, you need to smoke about 5 cigarettes to get one scene if you're going to do the continuity correctly. So he, in one scene, we had him smoking 2 cigarettes at the same time. He actually got sick because he had to smoke so much. He had never smoked so much in his entire life, and he blamed me for making him do that. But he also then quit for a while, so he should thank me.
What an interplay!
Yeah. So I that's what I was thinking about, and I'm always watching the cigarette butts, and it's just amazing how much he smokes. It's ridiculous. Yeah. When you on TV see less people smoking, fewer people smoke on TV than you used to see. This show is sort of like making up for lost ground or something like that.
That and Mad Men.
Yeah. Well, that has to be there. Yeah. This doesn't have to be there. That has to be there.
And maybe before they were looking for funding for the show, maybe he wasn't a smoker, but then they're like, we're going to have to make him a smoker because the only people that are going to pay for this is Camel.
Yeah, but if they're going to do that for the sake of advertising, okay, then you'd have him smoke a little bit less, because I think the amount of smoking he does is almost worrying. You want to, it makes you feel like you've overdone it when you watch it. That's how I felt anyway. And I felt like if he smoked one every other scene, then it would be more appealing. Then it would be something cool that he does once in a while, as opposed to this sort of insane habit that he has, which becomes almost nauseating after a while.
He is a man of habits, of substance.
Yes.
Substantial substance habits.
He likes his beers, he likes his cigarettes, and he likes his Quaaludes.
And ATB, alcohol, tobacco, and ATF, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. Yeah. So anyway, that was just an interesting side rant that seems to just add to everything that goes into this world of this mythology of this show.
It's a meta point, which is interesting too.
Yeah. There was one other thing I think I wrote down to bring up, and that was,
you wrote things down?
I did. Yeah, I might look at it in a second.
Me too. Most of mine are questions, though.
Ask away.
No, please say your other thing.
So, okay, just on the...
Get ready, folks. Matt's going to say a thing.
On the idea of iconography and mythology and stuff, it's wonderful that this show is set in Louisiana, because you almost have You've got this dynamic between, you've got little pockets or little islands of civilization, or what is known, what is above water. And then you've always got this water, these shots of water encroaching, or almost like they're about to take over the land again. And when you have, well, the hurricanes and floods down there, it does. And
right. Yeah.
And the idea of flooding throughout myth is a chaotic power. It's a chaotic idea, which threatens to undo everything that has been built, everything that has been civilized, everything that has been turned into the cosmos meaning what is known, versus the chaos, which is what is unknown. And anyway, in the show, that's always encroaching. It's always impending. And another idea that runs alongside that is that throughout mythology, the chaotic power has maybe the majority of time been associated with the female aspect, because females give birth. They have this mysterious process going on inside of them. They embody this process. And so, in the show, maybe part of that is, men feel, if men on the other side are the idea of authority and civilization and what is known, what is ordered, and what is structural, then you have this impending threat of this female power, this water taking it over. And so maybe that's not making a statement to say you should do this or you shouldn't do that, but it's more of saying, putting the dynamics up against each other, that women have sort of this chaotic power, this mysterious power that the civilized man can't understand, can't deal with, can't control. And so then you've got Louisiana being a perfect setting for these big ideas, because even the landscape reflects this human psychology going on, of this this male trying to, like this male hierarchy, this male structure, this male system trying to control this power, rather than, like Rust, dance with it and coexist with it as an equal, as a balancing cooperative ballet. So anyway, the water, it's so cool.
That is a good point. I hadn't thought about that. So it's sort of like it's always right there, and you're always maybe subconsciously uneasy about its destructive power. And that if it were to whirl up and move, you would be done, basically. And you have nothing. There's nothing you can do to stop it. But it's still an effort to keep it calm and keep it cool and keep it under control. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I hadn't thought about and it's sort of like they're sort of moving through the bayous, right? And when they're going to they actually mention that specifically when they're going to the bunny ranch. Right, they say that specifically. It's right past one. So I wonder if that's if they're mentioning that to sort of set up that parallel, that they're about to confront a group of ladies who they have no power over, because the person in charge of them is the madam. She understands her power. And it's not like they're a powerful force per se against the those two, but I think the idea is they've crossed into a place where they no longer have any real control, and as soon as they get into that space, they show their true colors. And Rust reveals himself as a pontoon who can rise with the tide. Whereas Marty reveals himself as someone who, even when he finds himself sort of shoulder deep, he still feels uncomfortable and still tries to fight and resist and maintain his dominance. Which, if that's the intention of the writers, is some pretty deep stuff.
Yeah,
I mean, we could be reading too far into that, but I think that it makes sense. It really makes sense.
Yeah.
And I'm actually averse to. I'm always very cautious about finding false meaning in things that have no meaning. You ever listen to Flight of the Conchords? There's a new song. There's a new song that they produced. It's called "A Seagull," and one of them starts singing about being a seagull, and then Jermaine, the other one in the band, he says, "Okay, so this is basically a reference to he's trying to escape from his bonds and become free, and he's trying to liberate himself." After he sings a specific verse, then the other one will interpret it. But then as the song progresses, they start to argue in the song, and then you realize actually at the end of the song that there is no allegory. The singer, the other one, is a seagull. It's about a seagull who plays a piano, and at the end of the song, he's just playing the piano with his hands like a bird with wings. And he's actually a seagull. Yeah. So I'm always, one of my pet peeves is when people try to extract meaning from something that was kind of just arbitrary, something that was just sort of thrown out there as a thing there sort of for fun or even accidental. Mm-hmm. But so I have my antenna out for that because it's a pet peeve. So but sure. This show, every time we sort of dig into it a little bit and we go down a particular rabbit hole, whether it's the last one with the two characters and the dynamics between them, or this one where we're kind of focusing more on femininity, everything seems to have a sort of basis, and you can't really dig through it and realize that it's just an accident. I mean, you bringing that up, it makes perfect sense that's where it would be. That's the perfect setting for the show.
Yeah. It's amazing if he wrote it with Louisiana in mind. I mean, listening to directors and writers and people in the business of storytelling talk, especially the good ones, they think about these things. Yeah, sure. They think a long time about the settings, each scene, each frame, what it says and what they're trying to get across. And when you get somebody who's dealing in iconography like this, the whole reason the show was popular, or Harry Potter is popular, or Indiana Jones is popular, or Star Wars is popular, again, it's all those things are appealing to the way we're wired, and exactly. We're wired to recognize things from our past, from our individual past, our collective past, and the things that we recognize, that we see. Those patterns are, we recognize them as real when we see them as powerful. And what does that mean? It means that, if I do this again, then if I repeat this, then the same thing will happen. I can rely on this pattern to produce results. Right. It's one of the things that Eliade talks about in like ritual, like ceremony, like telling a story, like making a show that tells a story about things that are in our psychology, that are inherent in our psychology, that we respond to. Like stories like this and stories that are effective evoke that out of us, and that they become popular. Harry Potter, Star Wars, just think of the big ones, stuff like that. So
right. It's sort of like, I sort of see it like musical notes aren't actually things. They have a certain pattern, and that pattern resonates with a certain sort of structure that we have in here that doesn't have any objective merit. It does resonate in a certain way. There's a certain pattern and a structure to a C major. And when someone hits a C major, you say to yourself, there's a little thing in your brain that goes, yep. You know what I mean? Yeah. But if it's off, you go, ugh. Even though that pattern is so similar, so it resonates with something that's sort of buried deep within your mental structure, whatever that is. And it's nothing objective. There's nothing about a C major that is objectively in the universe a a good thing. But because of the way that our brains are structured, when that particular chord is hit, the peaks and the troughs line up, whatever that means exactly. I don't know the psychological underpinnings of that, but somehow there's that, whatever that is, that allows us to think that sounds good. And it's kind of the same thing, and it's the reason that, it's like you said, the reason that when we see something that has it, even if we don't recognize it, we are drawn to it. The reason is because there's a sort of natural resonance. And I don't even think I think it's less to do with our own lifetimes and more to do with sort of our evolutionary programming. Sort of encoded within us are these sort of cultural norms, the things that, almost instincts, the things that tell a turtle to climb, to scramble toward the sea rather than away from it. Yeah. What is that? There's something there. It's an instinct. So so that sort of mechanism is what resonates with these stories that we hear, and that's why they're so powerful. So that's what makes me so frustrated when it comes to things like Star Wars, The Last Jedi. And I don't know if you saw that one, but I think even more strongly than ever that is a terrible, terrible movie, because when someone writes something just to sort of masturbatorially come up with something that looks cool, right? You can tell, and it feels thin, and you never want to watch it again. And you can't fake it. You can't fake it. It has to. Those elements have to be there in order for it to be classic. And I think that's sort of the unrecognized common denominator. Those deeper elements have been scraped away from things like that. So that movie sucks because it's visually Star Wars, visually great. And when you're watching it, you think this is a great movie. But after it, you come away thinking this is a horrible film because you feel those deeper connections weren't made. There was no resonance. And on reflection, you hate it. At least I did. I'm speaking for myself, but
I thought the opposite. I thought the exact opposite about The Last Jedi.
No, you didn't.
I thought it was great for a lot of reasons.
I can't believe that. I'm
really?
Surprised. I'm shocked. And
because for me,
okay. Well, if we could just turn this into, can we just for about 5 minutes? Let's put brackets on it. Okay, we got 5 minutes. It is now 17 o'clock. So, So why'd you like that movie?
Briefly, I think what Rian Johnson recognized is that the Campbellian narrative has been beaten to death. But it's actually, let's say it's a Campbellian symphony, but the only part of that symphony we ever get to hear is this part of it. And this is the part that George Lucas capitalized on, and thus was reflected in dozens, if not hundreds, of stories since the original trilogy. Okay. But what Rian Johnson, I think, saw is that, wait a minute, the symphony, the Campbellian symphony, there's this whole other 80% that nobody ever touches on, that nobody ever expands upon. And so I think what he was trying to do.
Don't talk about what he was trying to do. Talk about what he did or didn't do, because you saw the movie. The movie is what he did. So, did he succeed?
Sure.
You liked the movie, right?
I did, and for mainly because, or one of the biggest reasons is because he did just that. He said, "Hey, okay, we've heard this part of the story a million times, so we're going to say, yeah, that's cool and good, but what about the other part of human narrative? Let's look at that too, which includes killing off sort of the things that you expect to see again. So turning it into this is what we expect Luke to do. This is what we expect Han Solo to do. This is what we expect the three big characters to do. And we're going to see them do it again and give you something safe. It's like, no, that has to, much like myth does throughout history, it has to die and then be resurrected or refreshed into something new. And so I saw a lot of that refreshing, but at the same time, it's still in the Star Wars universe, and I'm not a huge Star Wars fan. It didn't change my life like it did for a lot of people, but I think that's what Rian Johnson did. Is he was saying, yeah, much when he destroys the tree that contained the knowledge, but you think those books are gone, but actually they preserve those books. So it's kind of like, okay, well, the story of Isis and Osiris don't speak to anybody anymore, but which is the tree that gets destroyed in Star Wars. But the books get preserved. That dynamic inherent in that myth gets preserved. We don't have to throw away the effective core of the myth. So he's carrying.
That's about the only thing he gets right. That is the thing that he does well. Yeah, but that's about it. So I agree. I completely agree that it needs a refresh. All of the things that happened could have happened. You could have had a disgruntled Luke Skywalker who has sort of walked away from his original path and his original character. You could have a majorly OP protagonist who has this some sort of hero's journey leading towards something. You could have this foil who has a conflict between the light and the dark. But actually, Kylo is the main character of the new trilogy. It's not Rey, because Rey is a monolith of a character. She is not a character. She doesn't have a hero. There is no hero's journey. On the surface, it looks like a hero's journey for just a second, where she leaves her scrap heap on the planet that she's from, and she goes on this journey. But on a deeper level, she has no growth. A hero's journey, the basic structure, nobody wants to throw that away, right? Yes, we need to refresh it, but we need to keep these sort of core things that make it what it is. That's the thing that resonates with us. The fact that there are these key elements that resonate with us. When Rey encounters anything, she immediately destroys it. And she's immediately way more powerful than that. Kylo tries to control her brain. No, sorry, I'm more powerful than you. I know you've been trained for 20 years, but I'm more powerful than you, and I don't know anything. Suddenly, there's no journey going on here. Every time she faces something, she immediately destroys it. There's no point where you are suddenly out of your depth, and as soon as you're out of your depth, you sink to your lowest point and then learn skills along the way and have things passed to you along the way, and then you finally defeat the monster, right? Whatever that happens to be. That's the basic structure. It's not there for her. She's a monolith. Everything she encounters, she becomes a superhuman and defeats it. Everything. Including a lightsaber battle with someone who's far better trained than she is.
Yeah.
And that's completely unsatisfying. Even when she meets Luke, she doesn't get any training. She just fails and leaves. She just quits. She just goes for no reason. There's no training going on. So it's a mess. It's like Rian Johnson had the right intention that I need to destroy what's old and I need to build something new. But he forgot to put back in those core tenets that make the hero's journey compelling, that make the characters compelling and make the plot compelling. He forgot to add in the Campbellian elements that make a story actually interesting. He forgot. He had the intention of refreshing it, which is a great intention. But he just forgot to put in all of these sort of the structure underneath of it. It's very frustrating. I would encourage you to listen to, and I'll send you a link, I would encourage you to listen to a critique. It's like a 3-hour critique.
Yeah.
By a guy called, his name is Mauler. And it is genius, honestly. It's one of the best things I've ever seen on YouTube.
Okay.
It's great. And it's about 3 hours long, but I strongly recommend it. It's very thoughtful and well done. And I would like to get your opinion after that.
Okay. I'll it's our 5 minutes on
back to the topic at
Star
hand.
Wars.
Yeah, that was only 17 minutes.
Yeah.
So,
I'm not particularly invested in that series.
Yeah, it just surprises me that to me the Mythmeister basically is what you are to me.
There's more that I could talk about in that movie for sure that is I think psychologically rich that Rian Johnson had in there that's worth talking about. But again, it's that.
How about this? Let's do another one on this sometime. You watch that
I need to watch the
3-part
movie
series.
again.
Watch the movie again. Watch that 3-part series, and then we'll have a discussion.
Yeah. Sure.
And we'll see. And and maybe even watch the earlier episode that I did with Kevin.
Oh, I did watch a lot of it, so maybe I'll finish it. I think I got into about 45 minutes to an hour of it.
That was nearly the end of the Star Wars part. We started talking about something else. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So you said you had questions about
so
True Detective?
Right. Yeah. I wanted to go back to one thing first really quickly about the conversation that, by the way, you guys, if you haven't seen True Detective, none of this is going to make sense. So if you haven't watched True Detective, you should watch it. People viewing this, because we're going to do 8 of these episodes totally. So if you're still here, then I don't know why you're here. You've made a terrible mistake. Stop now. Yeah. Watch the entire series, or go one by one like I'm doing, and follow along with me. And then that'll be interesting too. That would be interesting if some people were to watch it one by one, as I'm doing, and some people were to watch the whole thing. Then they might see it more from your point of view or more from mine. Or watch it 5 times like you have.
Oh, just you'll be there. You'll join me soon enough.
I don't think so, because I like it, but I don't love it. Yeah. I like it. It's a good show. It's a solid show, and I find a lot of the ideas are interesting. But it's not making me want to. I can't wait to watch it again. You know, more of a Saturday morning cartoons type of guy.
Yeah. Sunday morning self-loathing kind of guy here.
Yeah. You're well into the abyss.
Oh man, if I could come out on the other side like Rust and just be even keeled. And there's a line he says later in the series, and it's gold. It's a genius. It's you'll know it, and
Well, actually, it's one of his lines that I want to talk about now. That he says. So why did you decide to go into homicide? He said, because I want to remain part of the body.
Yeah.
Okay, so my take on that, and please tell me if I'm wrong. Basically, he's this sort of zeppelin floating above the landscape, and all that's needed for him to fly off into oblivion is for someone to snip the little line that tethers him to the ground, and he's completely lost. And I'm very interested in characters like that, because they are at once both so far removed that they're able to remain objective and solve real problems, but at the same time so far away from real events and so disinterested emotionally that they aren't able to maintain sort of real relationships and actually care about people. So I guess my question is, well, I'd like to know your take on that particular line, but my sense is that it's the darkest thing that he could get into, as if he were trying to sort of that line tethering him to the earth is a thin little balloon string, and he wants to sort of strengthen it with something that's extremely real, which is investigating murders, which is about as tethered as you can be to events going on in the world. Though it's such a sort of graphic thing that if that doesn't keep you attached, nothing will, right? So that's my take on it. I wonder what you think about that particular line, or that particular thought that he has.
Yeah, so maybe an enlightening scene for that question is, when they're talking about, when Marty asks him, the other night when you came over to the house, why didn't you leave when the guy from work placed that call? And he says, well, I came over and I got pretty down because I've been drinking and I've been thinking about my daughter. And then I was just thinking of being around you and your family and, with your wife and with your 2 daughters, that was going to be too much. But then I got around them and it wasn't so bad. I think he said, I'll stick around. So thinking about maybe that thread that keeps him tethered or still attached to having some interest in the common affairs of humankind is his daughter. And so it's sort of, it's the idea that gives him pause. Remember when he's trying to talk to the detectives and he is going to tell the story about how his daughter died, but then he truncates it. He doesn't tell the whole thing. He becomes emotional it affects him. It gets to him, and so he's still tethered by his sort of turmoil that he hasn't resolved with his daughter. And so, I don't know, maybe becoming a homicide detective is his escape from, or his journey towards, resolving his own inner conflict or unresolved or mystery he has with his daughter. His daughter Sophia, that was hit by a car, is what is sort of implied.
But then later, he seems to be almost happy about it. Is he actually happy about it, or he says the greatest blessing is that you would die as a child and not have to go through all of the suffering, and he was relieved of the sin of being a father.
Yeah.
What's that all about?
So maybe that question could be answered with going back to the theme of the show, is that the sin of becoming a father is, and not as though it has to be this way, but in our society, is that you have to teach, you have to raise up with a man or with a boy or a girl, you have to raise them up to play a role and not play other roles. So you have to raise them up to wear a mask. And so maybe that's what he means with potentially being the sin of being a father, is that look at the way that these women that are sort of dominated by men, that they have to act. Look at the way that Marty talks to the receptionist at the office or the police headquarters where they work.
That's one thing that sticks out at me. Yeah, that really stuck out. It reinforced his way of being.
Yeah, and it's playful. It still has that tinge of it's uncomfortable, He calls
her a vixen.
Yeah, like you little vixen. And then he says, has he asked her to get him a cup of coffee yet? She says, how do you want it? Was that in the first episode?
He does it in both episodes.
Okay. But and in this series, women are raised to play a specific role. And so maybe Rust is asking, and again, he poses that as a question. He's asking, maybe, is this something good that I got out of having to perform, that I didn't have to perform the role of telling somebody how to be, taking the joy of being in just ambiguously curious child, not having a set role to play yet, and not having to take that away from someone.
Is he being cynical, or is he a drunken bodhisattva?
Drunken bodhisattva.
You think so?
But he can be cynical and sincere. I think to him, it's somebody who has become the bodhisattva that, all things are Buddha things. Cynicism, sincerity, it's the same thing. It's just the same thing from a different angle.
Yeah. So, basically the idea of that is that during the investigation, he's still climbing out of the abyss. Maybe he's just reached the cusp on his way out, and he's seeing he's still suffering from some of his visions. He's got some synesthesia going on, and he's still traumatized by his daughter's death.
Sure.
And that's why he gets drunk. And then 17 years later, yes, he's a drunk, but he has no ambition. He doesn't feel that he needs to tether himself anymore. He has himself cut the tether to the earth using his own scissors. And it seems, I don't know what's going to happen later in the series, but that's just my take, right? He has himself cut the string, and he's now sort of floating along until his life ends, but that's fine. He knows exactly who he is. He drinks a lot because that's exactly what he wants to do. And
there's nobody there to stop him.
Nobody's there to stop him. He doesn't have visions anymore, which suggests that he's sort of on his 2 feet now, maybe psychologically, as opposed to being before sort of still plagued by the visions that he was having, whatever after effects he was having from his days in narcotics. And now he has this sort of perspective of his daughter having been spared from life, not even in a cynical way that life is a terrible thing, but I think it, the way that he says it, it comes across earnestly, as though, yeah, he has sadness about it, but he genuinely believes that if, as you said, if he had become a father, he would have been Marty, and he would have raised a subservient little girl who fit into her place in society, and then would have just, gone through the same sort of hell that Marty's wife is going through now, whatever that happens to be. Maybe there's more of that coming later. But I think he sees that, but I think he also sees that, and it's something that sounds very dark, but something that I've thought about before. If somebody's going to die, is it better to die when you're 22 and the lights are all on, or is it better that it happens when you're, a little kid? I know that sounds horrible, but it's something that I've spent time thinking about, and I haven't really come down on either side of the fence, but you wonder if life is a scary place, and I disagree with his hard cynicism that life is a bad place to be, but I don't think that he's insane for saying that. And it makes me feel like that conversation has set him up as this sort of bodhisattva, someone who has, basically a bodhisattva is someone who has snipped the line, become enlightened, and chooses to remain instead of sort of disintegrating into the whatever.
Right.
And that person, though, has to become a guide. So right now, he's not a guide. What it makes me feel like is, if that's the narrative, and it's my feeling that it is, what I would like to see happen is that he gets into it and provides insight to the 2 detectives who are interviewing him, and he becomes a vital part of their investigation, and he becomes the key, sort of the cornerstone to whatever they're trying to. I mean, because they're not talking to him for no reason. Clearly, they're trying to solve something that's similar, or they're trying to understand his process. He becomes a crucial part. He becomes their bodhisattva, basically, to guide them toward where he is.
Show them the way.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know. That's my take. I don't know where that's going, but that would be cool. If they did that, that's what I would like to see.
Yeah, so there's so the Buddha is an Eastern idea of with the Bodhisattva, the Buddha is the Eastern idea of sort of the embodiment of light and dark, both operating at the same time in equal measure and sort of maybe indistinguishable from each other. It's what is. Yeah. In more Western traditions, do you know Hermes, Trismegistus, something? Have you ever heard of
that thing you just said? I don't know, but the first I know. Yeah.
So in alchemy, Hermes Trismegistus is the one that.
How do you say that? Trismegistus?
Yeah, it's like tri, and then it's almost like the word tri and majesty put together. I think I don't know how the pronunciation. I've never heard it pronounced, but just looking at it looks like Trismegistus.
Maybe the S is silent.
Yeah.
maybe it's pronounced as a K.
Potentially. But
I think you handle stupid things that I say very well.
That's just because I'm not.
Because I said something really dumb earlier, and you said that was good humor.
Yeah, and it is.
Yeah,
I still believe.
No,
that.
I don't think that you were being genuine there, but you said the thing that you said was good.
Stop throwing me curveballs with your comedy.
It insults me that you call it comedy. I call it an inability to be genuine all the time.
Yeah, and I can't do the other. That's why we're good compliments. I can be the Apollo to your Dionysius.
Yeah, so. We're a great team, except we're both drinking wine. But you're not.
That's our link. That's our we're tethered to each other.
Yours is intravenous. Mine is oral. Is that a little pipette I see coming out of yours?
Shh. edit it out, cut it out. So Hermes, but in the mythology, Hermes is a hermaphrodite. In fact, I think, hermaphrodite is Hermes and Aphrodite put together.
So it's a derivative of the two.
I can't remember, but no. So the term sense. Hermaphrodite. Well, the term hermaphrodite is taken from the word or from the name Hermes and from Aphrodite, and it means the two together, so hermaphrodite. But Hermes Trismegistus is the initiatory being that is the one that initiates people into secret knowledge or becoming an embodiment of the two. So you've got sort of Rust acting like the Buddha, acting like Hermes, which is Hermes Trismegistus is very important in alchemy, which is all about reconciling the pairs of opposites. The coincidentia oppositorum, the mysterium tremendum. These are all ideas where basically you have the marriage of darkness and light, the marriage of male and female, and the two things that were separated at the beginning becoming one again, which goes back to that theme of male-female power dynamics in the show. Sort of the chaos and cosmos, what's civilized, what's chaotic, the water and the civilization working together rather than separately. So that speaks to potentially Rust's role in the show as somebody who does embody the male and female aspects, who can deal with it, who has become enlightened, and then being able to show other people the way.
I think, does that happen? Does he get more in the 2000? What year is it? 2004.
2005. 10, I think.
Is it? Whatever. Well, the show happens the earlier part happens in 95 and 17 years later, so that would require some mathematics.
2012. Yeah. 2012 is when it takes place now.
Okay,
the current
so
time.
Yeah, does he take on a heavier role?
His role is consistent. I'll say that. It's consistent as a teacher, for sure.
Well, I mean, his role so far is to be an interviewee. That's it. Does it go beyond that? Does he actually walk around at all or do anything?
It does. It goes beyond.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
That's good. I like when things are, if it were just an interview throughout the entire 8 episodes and they were just interviewing him, that would be a misused opportunity, I think.
It progresses. I'll say it progresses.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
That's good that it progresses. I'm happy to hear that. I think that really great writing here would be, I think what we've just agreed upon is that he's a kind of bodhisattva, enlightened person. But I think some people watching it without really thinking about it would say that he's cascaded farther down and he's now a wreck and has I guess he was hold on a second, let me think about how to put this together. From one point of view, he has come out of the abyss, found his footing, and now is a person who understands who he is and who is stable in the world, even if that is being an alcoholic, in a way. Cynical, yes, but a realist, and more stable than he was earlier, 17 years before. From another point of view, from the point of view of someone watching as a, let's say, through Marty goggles, would say, oh, he's gone the other way. He was a detective. He had a job. He was, he was solving crimes. He was keeping society safe. Now he's just some bum living behind a bar, drinking a lot, working 4 days a week. He's useless. So it's sort of like, it depends on whose goggles you're looking through. If you're looking at him as if you're looking at it through Buddha goggles, then he's progressively moving upward. If you're looking at it through Marty goggles, he's progressively going down. And it's interesting how those two are complete opposites. He's at his lowest point according to society, and he's at his highest point for his own, in the sort of the trajectory of his own personal enlightenment, which I think is, I've just sort of realize that, which is really interesting. It's amazing.
Sure.
It's a cool idea. Yeah. I mean, I don't know where it goes, but just episode 2, that's cool.
Do you feel like that?
Ooh, this is the first question you've asked me. All right, go ahead.
Do you feel like it's kind of like at this point, well, it's like, why are we even talking about this show? And for me, I'll look at a show like this and think, okay, if this is a reflection, it makes, I like the show. And if it has some bearing on reality, that on the way that humans really do think, even if this is such a grandiose and exaggerated story, then what can I pull out of this to potentially use to look at my own life in real life?
Right.
Is there anything there? Is there any wisdom to glean? Is it just for fun? Are the thoughts deep enough? I mean, do you see does this show, and spending time watching this show and the ideas you can get out of it, does it add anything to the way that you think?
Yeah, absolutely. It's very pithy in that sense. And I think I sort of see it like, I have to plan a lot of classes because I teach some English classes to students, and sometimes I'll use TED Talks. And when you're looking at a TED Talk through the goggles of a person planning a lesson based on that TED Talk, it no longer becomes a passive viewing experience. You have to watch it from the point of view of what is actually pithy about this talk. So you can have a talk that might have 5 million views, but it has 5 million views because it was entertaining. And when you actually go through it and look for concepts, you find maybe one or sometimes none. But sometimes you go through a TED Talk, even if it has very few, and this could go for YouTube videos, and it goes for whatever, and I'm kind of using it as an analogy for this. When you find a really good one, it's almost like you can't write down the questions for the class fast enough because the talk is so pithy. It's like, wow, that's 20 minutes of discussion, that question alone in the first 2 minutes, and then the next one is 20 minutes of discussion. So if something is truly deep in concepts, and if it's, I think, well put together, it's not a superficial thing, but it has these sort of, for those interested in looking at it with a variety of goggles, it has these layers that can be teased out and then played with. And if that's played within a class, then you can say, all right, well, where do you think, let's say the video is about how Netflix uses algorithms to choose which shows to put on as opposed to Amazon, who did that but kind of failed at it. What's the difference between them? Well, there's a TED Talk about that. And it might be a very boring TED Talk, but if you watch it with the goggles of someone planning a class, it's full of gems. There are so many things to talk about. You could talk about how algorithms work in society. You can talk about how you could talk about, what is the role, where do humans and algorithms sort of meet? What is the correct meeting place? Where does human creativity meet algorithm for the optimal outcome, which is why Netflix wins, because they have a really good human formula, whereas Amazon went too far on the AI side. So with this, it's not that it's my type of show. It's not the kind of show I would normally watch, actually. And it's not even something I don't even know if I'll watch it again so far. It's good. It's good. I don't like it as much as I've liked many other shows. But as far as pith goes, it's kind of like that too long analogy that I just made, where when I'm watching it, I can't write down ideas fast enough, and as soon as I think about one particular thing, that's 20 minutes of discussion. It's 20 minutes of things to think about and concepts, and we spent 40 minutes just talking about the picture of the girl in the house and why they showed that 3 times. That's a particular scene, and to someone watching this now who hasn't seen that, they might think that that's a really weird thing to do. But I think if they actually watch it, they'll say, I hadn't thought about that before. And maybe then, hopefully, what would be cool is if people are watching this and this conversation, our conversation, becomes a sort of springboard for them to start thinking about other things that maybe we aren't thinking about. And it's certainly made me think about this sort of dark bodhisattva guy, that this is a character I haven't thought about much before. And it's really giving me a lot of interesting ideas and not necessarily affecting my day-to-day life, which is, I think, what your question was, but just giving me a lot to think about.
Yeah.
The dark, the cynical bodhisattva.
Cool.
Yeah. How about you?
For sure, yeah, and it's sort of the characters that are unfazed. Again, light bodhisattva, dark bodhisattva, whatever the case may be. Rust is just somebody that's able to dance in the sense that he knows
pontoon.
We've
got a better analogy now.
Yeah, dancing, floating like a pontoon.
He's a dancing pontoon.
Yeah. Trying to maybe link that up with, how does this exaggeration or this embodiment, this ideal embodiment that has been manicured by a writer, how have I seen this in other people that I know or other historical figures that have come before? And then what is attractive about their life that potentially I could fold into my own life? And okay, well, let's look at Rust. What does he do? What's something interesting that he does? Well, he's calm, measured. He knows that society is a manufactured
edifice.
And are manufactured like an edifice to be participated in, and he can shed that when it holds him back. But he also knows that he needs to appease it if it impedes him from moving forward. But it doesn't really.
But that only when he's a detective, though, not later.
Yeah. And so, because for him, he's not looking to move up a career path or a corporate ladder. He has something intrinsically compelling to feed, and feeding that goes beyond the morality of acting a certain way around prostitutes, acting a certain way in the police station. And so he's compelled by something bigger than himself. And that's just that's a sacred idea. It seems like an effective idea that all the people that I seem to admire have also sought after themselves. So
does that at all inform your recent creative project of uncovering and pulling back the layers on do you want to explain your current project at all?
Yeah, sure, a little bit. It's still a little.
Go ahead and do a plug if you like.
Yeah, it's not. I wouldn't say it's malformed, but it is in the process of formation. But it's essentially a Patreon campaign where I'm sort of doing what we're doing here. We're looking at stories, looking at specifically myths in Europe, because I'm here in Europe and I have access to those more so than I did when I was living in Seattle. And it would take a plane flight to come to these locations that embody the myth. And again, looking at, well, what was compelling about that story? What's the mechanic that latches on to the human mind, that compels the human mind to think about it, to consider it, to ponder over it? And what can we pull out of it? What tools are those stories trying to give us, or what things are those stories trying to illuminate about the way we think? And then essentially create an image that somehow reminds us of that story, much like an illustration reminds us of an event in a story, or a poster for a concert reminds us of how we felt at that concert, or maybe what that performance was about. So it's just sort of, it's something we've done forever. Cave walls, stained glass windows, they're all doing that. They're trying to visually reinforce some mechanic, some truth about ourselves. And that sounds big and grandiose, but you can look at Berenstain Bears, and it does that. It's simple. It's a simple illustration, and it's merely taking part in that process. It doesn't have to be super grand and the last word of illustration or stained glass or theater work, but it's merely saying, hey, this is a cool process that makes you feel alive for participating in. And so it's just doing that.
Are the nails in the hands, are those self-inflicted? Are those meant to sort of represent his I'll put a link in the description. Are those supposed to represent his almost self-inflicted. After he sees terrible things, he almost wants to take those terrible things upon himself in a way. Is that the idea?
Yeah. So the picture I'm working on right now is about the Spanish painter Goya, and he's got these nails and hands.
Also,
and nails
by the way, a great jam for toast. Goya, I believe it's a pureed apricot. It's tasty anyway. Sorry, go ahead.
Seriously?
Yeah, it's great.
Not comedy, it was sincerity.
That was real. Yeah, put it on your rye toast. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah. So, for example, symbology like that could be just, when you see that, if mirror neurons are working correctly, or maybe how a lot of people would perceive it, they think, "Ouch, that looks like it hurts."
Yeah.
And so, not to give away too much before the image is done, but it's the idea of Goya experienced a lot in his lifetime.
Yeah.
2 sicknesses, which left him deaf in his old age. The French
many
invasion.
horrors witnessed, right? Horrors of war.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's got a series called The Disasters of War, and it's about when the French invaded, or the conflict between the French and the Spanish. And so the guy was exposed to a lot of harsh stuff, and he was a painter. And so it seems like, and it comes out in the pain in his mind comes out in his work, and he uses his hands to make that work. So it's sort of the idea of even the work of his hands was painful. So, and his skills, his trade was a painful thing to bear to some degree. I mean, So that, and whether or not.
So I got that one right.
Yeah. So, hey, great. That's great. So it means something's working, or
yeah.
So then wrapping it back around to what we're talking about, it's these ideas in these shows, and these Last Jedi, for better or for worse, pulling these things out of them to then say, okay, that looks useful. I'm going to plug it into the matrices here and see if it's useful later on, if it's a good tool to navigate through life the way that I want to.
It's almost a way to. It's another conversation we had later on with Kevin.
I need to go pretty soon too. Yeah. Sorry to interject that.
Yeah, but it's sort of like it's a way to explore a mental space that you wouldn't otherwise explore. It's a sort of like plugging in a floppy drive that you can remove as a way to see if that bit of software works in your particular operating system. And if it does, then you can incorporate it, and it helps you to navigate, even if it's in a very small and subtle way. And I think that's why it's not meaningless to talk about this show. It's a very interesting exercise in trying to tease out the contents of whatever the floppy drives may be, and sort of try them on. And I think thinking about them in solitude is not nearly as interesting as going back and forth on them, because if you have to go back and forth on them, then you are forced to sort of, one, you have to articulate what you think might be true, because normally when you have your own thoughts, those things are actually, you think that you thought them, but you didn't really think them. You approached thinking them, and then you said to yourself, oh, that's what I think, and then stopped right there. But if you have to make it come out of your mouth, then you have to articulate it. That is a much more intensive process.
Yeah.
And then having to then see how that affects other people. And you're very stoic, so it's very hard to tell. But hearing then other people say their own opinions about that same thing either reinforces it or shows where maybe there are holes in what you thought. Not that there's a sort of right or wrong thing where there's a debate, but it shows where the holes are, and you have to then re-examine, and then that it makes the whole, basically it makes it, instead of a 2D circle that's half colored, it makes it this sort of clear, somewhat spherical object that now you feel like you have an understanding of, which then can be a better software program.
Yeah, an idea I've been thinking about lately is that
say this thing, and then we can stop. I know you have to go.
Is that exploring things like this and then talking about it, like you just said, is I'm talking to you about it, but when I'm talking to you about this, I'm actually finding out a lot about myself. It's almost like I'm the viewer watching myself talk this through with you and then learning, oh, that's how I think. And then in a sense, by getting to know others, you're getting to know yourself, because other people either are just like you or different. There's similarities and differences. And then until we reflect those things off of each other, we don't really have an idea of who we are, because I understand who I am because other people are like me, or either they're like me or different from me.
Right.
And so it's and there's no manual for being human other than each other, in a sense.
And yeah. I didn't realize that until actually recently, because I think much of my own perspectives have been shaped by I've never really gone outside of myself for how to structure thoughts or perceive the world, and I want to do that more. And I've found this sort of conversation makes it, as you said, sort of makes me look at what I think as I'm saying it, and then later, even if I watch it again, not mm-hmm. only to help me refine my own points, but to examine whether or not I'm way off the track, or I'm close, or I'm actually being analytical when I'm just telling myself I'm being analytical. So I consider this one a success for sure.
Cool.
This is a huge win.
Yeah.
Well, I think we have a lot more, because I have about 7 more questions, and I think we can talk about them in maybe in the next one.
I can stick. As long as I can probably be done in like 4 minutes. I'm happy to talk for a little bit longer, or if you just want to cut it.
You know what? There's no exterior pressure forcing any question to be answered in a limited period of time. So I'd rather just leave it for the next one, and maybe there will be more meat there to build into the questions that I have once we go through the third one. I'm really going to try to be genuine and not watch the next one, even though I have only a 1 month HBO subscription. That's a trial. So I'm going to have to bite the bullet and do at least a pay for a month of HBO. But
okay.
But I think that will make it more genuine, because I want to maintain the dynamic of a person who hasn't seen the next thing and a person who has, because I think that adds to the conversation, even if it doesn't. It makes me think that it does, and that's just fine.
Well, I know when you're asking these things, or when you're saying some things, it's like, oh, I know in this episode he's going to find that out, and right. It's yeah.
Are you saying I'm prophetic?
Yeah, maybe perceptive.
Well, that'd be great.
Precocious,
for sure, definitely, yeah, without a doubt, yeah. Well, yeah, I think, but don't hesitate if you have something that adds to whatever is being discussed now, and it spoils a particular thing later. I don't care about spoilers. We don't need to go into that, but if you can build it in, if it helps, don't keep it out of the conversation, if you know what I mean. That would be, I think.
Sure. Yeah.
All right. Anyway, I'll let you go.
All right, man.
See you later.
See ya.